Hi, editing disclaimer. I want to make this very clear. I'm aware that all of my decisions I made throughout my experience that I'm about to talk about might not have been the best way to have handled the situations that I found myself in. Though I'm a human, I make mistakes. So are you. I know that you've made plenty of mistakes in the past. And I'm just here to talk about my experience with everything that happened, and if I can help out one person who may find themselves in a situation. I've done my job. This was one of the most valuable learning experiences that I've ever had in my life. So it's important to talk about. Thank you. Hi there. If you don't know who I am, hello, my name's Annie. I'm a 2020 high school graduate, and I'm your average online college student. So, in the past, it was a dream of mine to start a YouTube channel, but I'd only have content ideas that would last an average YouTube channel for about a week. Not anything creative. I was just obviously trying to be like other beauty gurus like My Life as Eva or May Baby or Bethany Moda. I never came up with ideas that I was truly passionate about, but something I went through recently inspired me enough to make a YouTube channel and sit down and talk about it to hopefully shed some light on a serious issue. Because if we don't talk about serious issues, they are just more likely to keep happening because people don't know the warning signs and they don't know what they can do to help themselves or somebody they know if they're going through serious issues such as these. Before talking about serious stuff, I'll be providing some disclaimers and background information, so skip to this time code if you don't want to listen to the boring stuff first. Some background information about me, because I feel like it's good to know a little bit about my personality in order to understand some decisions and points of views that I make throughout this story. So I've always been a soft-spoken, anxious, non-confrontational person. I would much rather bottle up emotions rather than make somebody else's day worse by expressing them. I seriously didn't have a standard for how I should be treated as a human being before this particular experience that I talk about. Disclaimers: if you are triggered by topics such as depression, anxiety, manipulative relationships, toxic relationships, I'd click off this video. If this video is not meant to bash the person who I talk about, I believe that he has made some serious mistakes in the situation, and so did I. I probably didn't handle it the best. Though this video is simply meant to be educational and spread the word about some topics that I feel like aren't talked about enough. And I believe that this person who I talk about heavily throughout this video has the ability to grow and mature. For that reason, I'll be providing a fake name for him and be providing as little details about him as possible throughout this video for the sake of his privacy. And if people start messaging me with guesses as to who he is, I'll reject all of them. And if he happens to see this video, he can't be mad at me because I left his identity private. And I'm just telling the truth. Also, I'm gonna be reading from my laptop down here, which is why I keep looking downwards, because I don't want to ramble on for 10 hours throughout this video, so if me looking down occasionally bothers you, then suck it up for the sake of the story. Thank you. So I'm gonna be referring to this person as Peter, because I've never met anybody in my life named Peter. So Peter and I met during our sophomore year of high school when we had the same lunch period. And to me it was love at first sight because at the time I was being bullied by these two nasty boys in my English class simply for existing. So a guy who was actually being kind to me was so important to me. And he was actually pretty nice right away, and obviously he started opening up more as we got to know each other for a longer period of time. And I found out that he had lost a very important loved one a couple of years prior to him and I meeting, and I felt immediate sympathy for him because I couldn't imagine going through something like that ever. But he never used it as an excuse for questionable behavior or anything. And I respected him for that because some people use their trauma as an excuse to be a bad person. Slowly but surely, questionable behavior started. He would make insensitive remarks about people sometimes, like making fun of LGBTQ plus people and making fun of people with mental disabilities, but I would shrug it off because I was infatuated with him. And I invited him to my birthday party and didn't even get a notice from him telling me that he wouldn't make it. So, then junior year of high school rolled around, and he and I had a lot of classes together, not just lunch, so we were able to become closer this way. And eventually there was a winter formal coming up, and I had enough balls to ask him if he would go with me as a friend. And he said yes. And I was over the moon excited about this. I got a dress and everything, and I even offered to pay for the tickets. But as the date was approaching, it seemed like he was avoiding talking to me, and eventually during a study hall, I asked him if he still wanted to go, and he said no. And I was crushed because I had gotten my hopes up to no avail. But for some reason, I was still clinging on to the feelings that I had for him. And then he got a girlfriend who he met online that lived in another state. And it killed me to sit there every day and listen to him talk about her. And I could see him becoming a more self-centered, jerky person with every day that he was in a relationship with this girl. Then, near the end of junior year, I remember how he assumed that this guy in our grade was on the spectrum, and he referred to him as a Berg, which was supposed to be an abbreviation for the word Asperger's. This infuriated me because my brother has borderline autism, which used to be known as Asperger's. So I sympathize with anyone who has any sort of mental disability because I've lived for 14 years with a brother who has a mental disability. I literally remember telling him that he was a dick, and I didn't speak to him for the rest of the school year. Then summer rolled around, and I unexpectedly got a message from Peter saying that him and his girlfriend broke up. And he knows how much of a jerk he was and that he regrets it. And I forgave him because I never thought that I'd see a day where he apologized and acknowledged that he did something wrong. So I figured that this was sincere. Then senior year started, and Peter and I did not have any classes together, but we talked nearly every day online. And homecoming was just around the corner, and I was going with some friends, but I told him, hey, if you go, we can meet up, because he really wasn't one for social events. But he went to homecoming, and we had a great time. Him and I were together basically the whole night, and we even slow danced when the slow songs played. And that was monumental for me because it was my first time getting a slow dance. After the dance, I got some messages from him telling me that he had so much fun and that he thought I looked nice, which was crazy to me because he's not an openly affectionate person. And then a month or two later, I had a mutual friend of ours telling me that Peter was going to ask me out. And I was so thrilled. I waited for days, weeks, months, and then he never asked me out. And it was really disappointing. Eventually, about halfway through the school year, Peter and I were talking, and we decided that we would be going to prom together, which was so exciting because I had gone with friends the previous year, and I had never had a date for a school dance before. But COVID-19 had different plans and cut the senior year short. About a week into the quarantine, Peter told me that he liked me and that something may happen in the future, but he wasn't ready for a relationship at the moment. And my heart exploded because I was so excited because this was like the second time that the feeling was mutual in my life. I remember feeling genuinely happy, and it had been a while since I had felt genuinely happy like that and had so much hope for myself. I should have known what was going on when the next day I told him that the conversation we had the day before meant so much to me, and he said that he was busy and couldn't talk then. Eventually, months passed, but I was still holding on to hope because these feelings I previously had were reignited to the max. And we could continue, and he would continue to occasionally throw compliments my way and provoke flirty conversations, so I was convinced that the feelings were still there. But after a few months, something started to change. He had gotten closer to a very good friend of mine. For the sake of the story, let's call her Lucy. And Peter started talking about Lucy a lot. I knew deep in my heart what this meant, but I didn't want to admit it. He basically told me that he liked her, and it felt like my heart was ripped out and stomped on. He noticed through text how visibly upset I was and gave me the average, "Eventually you'll meet somebody" talk. The day after he told me he liked her, he provoked a flirty conversation with me. And that day was one of the worst days of my life, so I gave in because of how vulnerable I was. And eventually he abruptly ended the conversation, saying that Lucy would never like him now, and I died inside. But it didn't help because I began subconsciously comparing myself to her and crying thinking about what she had that I didn't. And it was damaging to my confidence and self-esteem. And for the record, I'm not blaming Lucy for how I felt. I was just clearly putting those insecurities onto myself. This was just me overreacting. She didn't cause that. There was a time when Peter said how he was going to gift Lucy with some records because he wanted to give them to someone who would love and cherish them. Even though she didn't have a collection, and he knew that my record collection was my pride and joy. Around this time, I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which was just fun, having to deal with this drama in the midst of that. It's worth noting that Peter clearly had his own stuff going on because of the trauma he had gone through before. However, this doesn't excuse when somebody knowingly puts others down, and it was hypocritical of him to act as though he was an activist for women's rights, but then proceeded to treat them as though they're sex objects. Soon after, Peter began talking about another girl he knew online, and her birthday was coming up, and he was working so hard practicing a song for her, when all he did for my birthday was tell me that it was now legal for me to send nudes. I can take a joke, but the fact that he never said happy birthday to me stung, and the fact that he was working hard on a gift for another girl hurt, when he didn't give me anything for my birthday, not even telling me happy birthday. When I acknowledged this, he basically told me, "Sure, we are good friends, but she's a lifesaver." Someone tell me how that is not supposed to make me feel like the worst friend ever. This killed me because I had poured my heart into this friendship. I stayed up at night to help him if he expressed any signs of being suicidal. I would put my crappy day aside if he wanted to vent about his. I did everything in my power for him. And this girl who he was friends with began going through something traumatic, and he was totally that person who was like, "Oh, I feel worse than this person going through trauma is." Peter would constantly belittle me about things that piqued my interest, things that made me, me. If I talked about musicals or theater, he would always call me a nerd or read the message and not reply. And when I opened up to him about how this makes me feel like crap, he said that he tries to get invested and doesn't intentionally act like a jerk. And he said he'd work on it. Now, friends, guess in the comments if you think he ended up working on it. Nope. Through all of this, he had been provoking flirty conversations with me every few weeks, and eventually he forced me into sending a nude during one of these conversations. This wasn't the first time he had asked for one. He was begging me, and I gave him every excuse in the book, including telling him how I have a legit fear of intimacy, and that I'm not comfortable with it. And he would tell me that maybe sending it could help me get over my fear, which it didn't. It only made it worse. And I sent it basically to get him to shut up, and I cried myself to sleep that night. Just a few weeks ago, I had enough of everything, and I sent him a long message saying how fed up I was with him, telling me often that other people's problems are more worth his time, so he couldn't listen to me vent. I was fed up with him provoking flirty conversations with me only when it was to satisfy his own needs. I could go on. That's just a fraction of what I said to him, but I remained mature about it. And he responded so aggressively, completely putting the blame onto me, saying that I can't expect him to listen to me and make an attempt to help me because of his own affairs, and he implied that I still had feelings for him and needed to let it go. This dude having a fat enough ego to think I still like his musty ass. Then I clapped back with a message, while still maintaining maturity, saying that I don't expect him to solve my problems, but a good friend will listen to and support a friend who's going through a rough time, because it's comforting to know that you have some good support systems. Then there was a clear tone change in the following message. He said that he doesn't intentionally act like a jerk and that he's trying to navigate becoming a better person. And I said, fair enough. After that, I didn't talk to him nearly as much as I used to. We talked off and on, but there was no consistency anymore. There was a point where him and I talked almost every day for a whole year, but I was on my last chance I'd give him because I was still upset about the way he snapped at me and everything that he had done in the past. Then he said that he developed a crush on a girl that he worked with, who he had talked to once. And he said to me, sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. And I said, to be honest, it does. And then he went on this whole speech about how I'll find someone, that he thinks it's worth to go after someone who he talked to once, even though he said, sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, and then he proceeded to be angry about me being uncomfortable. That wounded me. Then he provoked another flirty conversation a couple of days later, and again ended this one-sided affair abruptly by saying how he's not okay with this because he potentially wants to get in a relationship with some girl who he talked to once. I eventually asked him a question that had been on my mind for a long time. Why did he tell me that he liked me back in March, and again in July if he didn't? His answer was bad judgment, which was just a great answer for my self-esteem. And he, for some reason, started going on a rant about how the only people whose opinions about him that matter are his own and God. And I ended the conversation saying that I hadn't felt that crappy in a long time. There's other things that went on in the midst of all this chaos. Like, he couldn't be happy for my successes. He didn't congratulate me on getting my license because it makes him feel bad that he didn't have his yet. Whenever he got called out, he would completely guilt trip you, and he's going through a rough time, so he can't help it. Like I mentioned before, he constantly made me feel ashamed for things that I liked, which made me ashamed of my personality. He would ignore certain topics that I'd bring up because they didn't interest him, only showing interest in me when he was needy. Just things that you should not have to put up with in any sort of relationship. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, I ended it. I told him that it wasn't good for me to continue speaking to him for the time being, and he unfollowed me from every social media, which stung at the time because they were my only forms of communication with him, and they were gone. But I knew that this was what was best for me if I wanted my mental health to get better, and a toxic friendship like that was not worth my time. And I was also sad that I didn't get a real adult reply out of it, but, it just goes to show how much of a child he was about the situation. Sorry if this story was very scattered. I know that I only scratched the surface with this information, and there's a lot more that I could have talked about, but I didn't want this video to be 10 hours long. If there's anything that was particularly confusing or that you need me to elaborate on, please let me know so I can clarify it in the description. And I feel like it was just important for me to get this video out there to talk about this taboo subject and to make sure that it doesn't remain taboo. I would love for you guys to discuss in the comments, offering any advice that you can give to people who are in a toxic relationship or friendship, and what they can do to get out of it. Because it's truly difficult to do so, and topics like this are criminally undereducated to young people in schools. It takes time for people who have gone through things like this to come to terms with what they're going through, so never get angry if it takes a victim a long time to talk about what they've went through. So how am I doing after this? Of course, I do have my sad moments that the that amazing friendship I had is gone, but I know that this is what's best for me. And I generally have been less stressed and more positive since this happened. So, this was how one of my best friends led me on, manipulated me, and was one of the most toxic people I ever met. So, morals of the story: no means no, and if somebody in your life can't understand that, screw them. Recognize your self-worth and don't be ashamed of that, ever. Acknowledge your mental health. Always do what's best for you. If somebody makes you feel small, they aren't worth your time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching this video. This means a lot to me that if you sat through this whole thing. And maybe this video is going to be a one-time thing. Maybe I'll sit down and make videos about other serious topics in the future. Maybe I'll make a part 2 elaborating more. Who knows? Anyway, goodbye. Thank you.